Bienvenue pour cet après-midi. On va commencer cet après-midi avec une table ronde qui nous est proposée, qui vous est proposée autour de débloquer la valeur de l'open source pour le business. Le titre, vous avez vu, est en anglais parce que nous avons le privilège d'avoir une interlocutrice qui nous est venue d'outre-Atlantique pour nous partager aussi son expérience sur le sujet. Et cette table ronde va être menée brillamment par Nicolas, à qui je donne la parole.
That was an introduction in French. That's not fair, Fred. Thank you, Fred. Fred was the initiative of the idea of this roundtable in the first place, which is the kind of the follow-up of a discussion we had last June at the OW2 conference. Anyway, so the goal of the roundtable is to share some hints as how to make the most out of open source and how to really unlock the value of open source. That's the title. That was easy. We'll start with Simon. Say a few words about the situation and the current difficulties.
So maybe to introduce why there is value in open source, maybe it could be good to put in context what it at stake in big companies like SNCF, for example, or other company in TOSIT and this kind of big information system. You have several problems. That is that you have to change software often because it is, for example, in public companies, you know, you have tenders. This is the end of the tender, so you have competition. And at the end of the competition, maybe it's not the same product. So regularly, you have to change the product. That's painful because it's a lot of engineering behind it. Sometimes this is the editor which is saying, okay, I discontinue this product. Okay, so you have to do the same. Sometimes it is, oh, my product is twice, third, much not cheaper, inverse, expensive, or thank you. And so you have to react because it's not sustainable anymore. And this kind of stuff happens always and more. And so you have to find a way to be more resilient and have a better mastering of your IT system. And this is what is at stake at the beginning. Open source, so it's not because we are open source lover, even if we are, but it's more that we have to find a solution. And the solution is by using open source software.
It is, actually. So it sounds pretty simple. We have a problem, we have a solution. So obviously everybody should embrace open source, and the world is fantastic. But somehow it's not quite the case. So we're going to see why it's not really the case. I think the main problem is that open source is not yet identified as a winning strategy, not everywhere. So why not? There are still quite a few misconceptions. There's plenty of security problems, there's plenty of legal problems. There is no support for my solution and so on. So yeah, sorry. Another point is I think the small editors are not as well organized as a large commercial editor. So that's another reason why open source is not yet adopted at large scale. So the next point is we need to do something. How do we get organized? And this is for Philippe. And we haven't introduced ourselves yet. So maybe we can start. So we can do it as we start.
Clavier, so I am responsible of the open source by SNCF.
Sébastien Lejeune. Hello everyone. I'm an open source advocate at Thales Group.
Hi everyone, my name is Philippe Bareille. I created and started the City of Paris's OSPO.
Hi, my name is Silona Bonewald, and I've been an open source consultant for a lot of businesses creating OSPOs or inner source type internal pieces.
In many places, in many companies. I'm Nico Toussaint, so I work for the open source program office at Orange Business. So talking about OSPOs, open source program office, Philippe, want to explain how to get started to
Sure.
open source?
Well, I'm here to bring some feedback from the public space, knowing and coming from the city of Paris. I can tell you that we've been involved in open source ecosystems for the past 22, 23 years now. We're the first French administration to put open source code out there and trying to, I'm saying trying, and I'm acknowledging this word very deeply, because we're trying to manage the community around this software. When I'm saying that we're trying is that we started our own software solution based on open source software and creating open source back in 2001, and ever since we've done our best. When I'm saying this is that the people involved at the very start of the project were already involved in open source communities, knowing their best practices and such. So they knew how to communicate, how to culture their teams. But it was like an individual to individual knowledge transmission. It was not an institution per se. It was not as professional as it should have been. So at some point, 20 years after, we realized, and by acknowledging the size of our community, that we needed to bring more professional practice to our practice of open source and to our knowledge of open source. So this is how, okay, OSPOs are a very well-known term in private sector. It's been out there for 20 years. In the public sector, it took us a bit of time to acknowledge this and to understand the benefits of organizing in such a conceptual way of working, because it doesn't mean that you need to change from an organization to another because you're starting or you're doing an OSPO. The OSPO can be adjusted to the size of your organization, to the goals of what you want to do in open source. So this is how the City of Paris's OSPO was created a couple of years ago, with no huge pressure, with no huge goals to start. We actually contributed to the open source good governance initiative. Thank you. You're doing it perfectly. And we actually helped by bringing this public space angle to say, okay, this is how private sector is doing it. This is how we can do it because we know our environment, we know our scope, we know how good we can be at some point. But at some point, we need to professionalize our practice and usage of open source. So, long story short, I'm trying to say that we knew, and even if the open source culture was there, we still needed to professionalize it and to do it in a proper way where we could integrate in some framework, in some blueprint where we could define our own goals, ways to achieve them, and have the best scope of how open source could deal with problems that we were experiencing. So this helped us build our own roadmap. Here again, you're great. And this helped us define our roadmap, which was also aligned with the digital roadmap for the City of Paris.
Okay, yeah.
I'll put in the pitch. You can also download this for free off of the OSPO Alliance's website. So you can get this in a PDF format as well.
Creative Commons license. So one of the objectives was to educate the managers, the top management, right?
Actually, at the City of Paris, we have the luck that our managers, our elected officials, are all already acknowledging the power and the benefits of doing open source properly. So this is how it was voted at the City Council 23 years ago, and that it's top-down type of way. So we were sponsored by those people, and we're just trying our best to do it like on an everyday basis to achieve our goals.
So you're very lucky to have already, which is not the case, which is a nice transition for Sébastien, who was not in that situation.
Yeah, having all the people educated about open source practices is not always the case, and especially in big companies like Thales, the knowledge and the way of practicing is very different and various. And that's why at Thales Auspos we decided also to put a lot of effort in this. That means there is no week where we don't meet people from various countries, various business line, and we tried every time to have a short session, like 1 hour, with my colleague from inner source team also. And the main objective is to teach the people about what we put in place. So how the OSPO is running, what are the process, the tooling associated with open source practices across the group. And that's also a way to discuss with the people and to enhance this OSPO, these processes and so on. Because, you know, you can fit with all the jobs, all the domains from your company. So it's very important to adapt your own OSPO and practices to the people. Otherwise, they won't go and they won't apply this way of working. And after 5 years, we see a significant difference right now. That means in terms of awareness, most of the people across Thales are aware about what we're doing in open source and inner source. And it was definitely not the case 5 years ago. But we still need to continue that because there's a lot of turnover. The people are new. There are new people coming into the company. And it has to be mandatory pass for the new people, and that's why we also put in place some self-training modules to help the people to have the very basics about open source and inner source practices.
Right, great. Just to add something on maybe another hint is what we've done at Orange for educating stakeholders, where just there a bit of advertisement, I'm sorry. At the Orange booth, we have shared our booth with many partners that provide support. And the goal is to show that open source is not second choice. It is professionalized. It is industrialized. You can, and we organize visits of deciders and CTOs just to come around and see what is the open source ecosystem. It looks like it's working really well from the feedback I've had so far. So something maybe we can be done more largely here and maybe in other seminars. Yeah. Where are we? So next thing is now, okay, you have convinced everyone in your company. You're very lucky. What's next? Have you supposed to explain a bit the career paths?
Yeah, there is another major blocker that we met in big company is the recognition. I mean, as open source convinced people, I guess, here in the audience, you know that contributors are very kind to be recognized for their contributions, and they want to work with other contributors. Inside a company, it's the same way, but it's very difficult to have some incentives to reward the people doing these contributions. And we worked like 3 years ago with the HR people just to reflect this contribution. So it can be either inner source but also open source contribution to be recognized as differentiators for the expert path. So in Thales, we have this kind of path where you start, for example, as a developer, then you get an experienced tech lead, you become sometimes architects, or you gather more experiences, more specialty on specific skills and domains. And each time you have to be promoted, and these contributions are now a way to be recognized as an expert, so that's very important. And it offers the ability to the managers, which are not always convinced by open source practices, by the way. It's a good way for them to put some value on their team members. And also for the people, for the contributors themselves, it's a good way to be recognized by the other experts in the group, and also to get some rewards and to put some spotlight on their projects, on their specific assets that they are sharing through open source community. So we definitely think it's a good incentive to leverage open source practices and to reward the people doing it for real.
So for some of the work that I've done, one of the things that I found that was really important in a lot of this is educating middle management, because normally your developers will be gung-ho and typically be right there with you. In fact, I ended up becoming part of PayPal's recruitment process because so many of the recent college grads wanted to talk to someone about open source and sat there and said, am I going to be able to? What's going to be allowed? What isn't going to be allowed? Because so many of them are already used to being on GitHub, already used to publishing, or already used to doing all that kind of work. And so when they come to a company, they don't expect to work there their entire lives anymore, right? Like we expect to have, 2 to 4 years if we're lucky, and then we move on to the next one. And so the only real way you can truly build a really good career is by having your code open. And then everyone can see what you're doing and know that you're good at it. And I don't know how many developers I've hired by going and looking at their code. So one of the things that we did is middle management had a really hard time reporting open source up to the C-levels and understanding how to quantify it and what that looks like. And so we were able to do some certification training where we actually went through a whole bunch of different types of reporting methodologies on that, as like, how do you report on things like what an open source contribution means to the company? Like if there's a lot of participants, that actually, if you've branded it with your company and people know that you're sponsoring, you're doing that, that gets you a certain amount of goodwill. And so helping all of those people understand that, I think, was a really big process, because then we got a huge amount of buy-in. In fact, it almost became a buzzword for a little while because of that. And so we had to do a certification process where we ended up training over 1,200 middle managers on that and how to report it.
Great, fantastic. So to move on, everyone's educated, everyone knows about open source now. Let's dig a little bit into the actual strategic value of open source. You have lots of stories to share on that too.
Yeah, and I think that goes with what I was just talking about, right? With doing the certification process and working with the middle management, where we did go over things like innovation and market positioning and time to market and customization, and how to show all of those different pieces in your reporting mechanisms so that you were able to have a greater reporting mechanism than, this feature cost this much, got these many people on it. Because that was like the normal reporting that you have for most companies is, honestly, the ROI sucks. See, I told you I'd say something controversial. I always do. But the metrics are normally poor, and you see it way too often in companies where they're feature-centric, and they don't take care of their architecture, and they don't take care of their infrastructure, and all these problems happen. And with this, you can actually come in and have much better metrics than you had previously. And so going in and creating that helped a lot.
Right. Simon wanted to share something.
Yes, it's about how to put open source at a strategic level, And for SNCF, something that really was, it's more than helpful. I think it was really a revelation. That is that I tried to put the topic open source into the railway sector. That is that I had the example from LF Energy, for example, that was going from building something in the domain of the electricity industry, a foundation about open source. That is making open source together with competitors. And I tried this idea, and I had the support from Deutsche Bahn, because I found someone that was beginning open source by Deutsche Bahn, because Deutsche Bahn was making, so it was like the right moment. And we pushed together, and it was at a moment where it was hearable, you know what I mean? Because you know that software is eating the world, and we success to say, okay, even we are making train runnings, in the trains there is software. On the tracks there is software, into the signaling tune. Software is everywhere. And software is, there is numbers about that. You know that into proprietary software there is quite 80% of open source software in it. It could be more, it could be less, but this is average. And so we expressed this idea that we should think about making software together with competitor in order to do what the boss has said, that is, we want twice more train, you know? And my competitor is not Trenitalia and so on. My competitor is the road. Okay, then we have to stick together, you know, and there is a huge value in making things together in order to spend less or spend differently in order to mutualize the effort. And that was a success. That is, it goes top level. So it was like you are here talking about open source and someone here say, oh yeah, it's a good idea. So about the question of middle management, that was really an enabler. And so it was very helpful.
Nice. So we talked about quite a few benefits of open source, the strategic. We didn't speak so much about money somehow, but of course it's a great way to save money. Let's say it. But we didn't want to speak too much about this. Let's talk about what's beyond saving money, other good reasons for which we want to use open source. And this is the kind of thing you can reuse in any company. Just try to pass messages.
Yeah, maybe I can add a few words on this, being and coming from the public administration and public sector. I mean, of course, we have low and decreasing budget every year. You know that the news don't tell the opposite. So we have to deal with this. But the context of the city of Paris, being the French capital, allows us big budget still. So when we started this project, again, a long time ago, the benefit from making it open source was towards other French administrations that shared the same needs as us. So we had solved our problems thanks to the software we had developed, and we were now then offering this to manage better public money and public good. So we embrace that Free Software Foundation in Europe saying that says public money, public code. It's very important for us to share that and to allow other French administrations to save that money and reuse. So that was the first point. The second is we share the same needs. We have developed this. Why don't you reuse it? So once you have figured out the differences between the software we provide you with and the delta with your own needs, why don't you come up and offer your contributions? So let's co-develop this. Let's make it together. Let's share. Let's co-finance this. We're talking about money, and I'm done talking about money. The public administration context allow us, using open source, allow also us to bring trust and transparency to the real end users of our software. We need to build trust between the public administrations and the civilians, the users of our services. So by showing there are no bias, that the source code is available and for everyone to witness that, yeah, okay, this is transparent, this is real, that our leaders, our municipal leaders are doing this the right way, is very, very important for such a context.
Yeah, Silona.
So when talking about beyond cost, one of the things I think that's really difficult to measure, unless you just go into marketing numbers, but is that whole aspect of what he was just talking about in regards to transparency, the goodwill factor, the bringing the communities together. Even when you sit there and you think about corporate open source, like some of the Linux foundations, styles, trade associations, where it's a bunch of companies getting together, there's still this, difficult to measure aspect in regards to the community portions, where that when you get a certain amount of openness in there, you get to have a level of diversity that's typically never seen in proprietary software. A company can try to be diverse, but let's be realistic. about that. They're never going to be great at it. While yet when you bring things over into the public and you start engaging, especially with governments and nonprofits, you get a whole level of diversity that excels things way past the normal portions. And even though this goes into the beyond cost portion, Harvard Business Review has 22 years of studies showing that once you do real diversity, you actually make more money. You know, it's like there's a huge preponderance of data in regards to that. And so, and I feel like you really can't put a real price on the goodwill that it also generates. But I know that, you know, and I'm sure a lot of other people here also feel that when a company is good and is good about supporting open source, there is a goodwill factor that goes beyond the cost aspects. And that does reflect into the employees and the other people as well. You know, it feels safer to go and work there.
Absolutely. So we're reaching towards the end, a little conclusion, and then we will have time for questions because we are on time, believe it or not. So public money, public code, trust, diversity, transparency. Maybe there's another dimension would be, everything that touches sustainability. Big word, one more big word, but it's also a really good opportunity for open source to shine. Maybe just to conclude on something more broader, we can look at open source and free software from the source code's point of view, but maybe we should also look at it more from the methodology and the philosophy side, because you know, free software is about what? Collaboration and innovation. Collaboration is what made humanity what it is today. Maybe will be what saves humanity in the coming years. I'm thinking of climate change and that kind of things. And collaboration, maybe thoughtful collaboration. So let's not build bigger machines or more powerful machines, but innovate towards frugality. Use less energy. That's also all those companies. I don't know. I'm sure Thales also shares some ambitious targets. You know, carbon neutral, SNCF as well. I mean, and everyone does share ambitious targets. We're going to be carbon neutral, diversity, and so on. And open source, free software definitely is the one of the key elements, I believe, to achieve this. Right. We have 15 right on time. Amazing. We have 15 minutes for questions, if you have questions. Should have said that from the start to give you time.
I bring the mic.
Thank you, Fred.
Thank you very much. Yes. Okay. Okay. So we talk about innovation and collaboration a lot, and it's true that when you want to make a collaboration with a Dutch band or another company in the same business as yours, it's okay to innovate and accelerate. But I have also a question about the consumption of open source for the infrastructure. When it's not your core business, but you really want to accelerate and have a strategic role on the choice of your infrastructure. I mean, nobody cares about being an expert in an application system or an expert of Docker management when you are dealing for energy or train railways. But sometimes, for me, it's very important to have this strategic view of the famous vendor lock-in that we can have with a cloud, hyperscaler, etc. So it's also very important to think about the strategy of the skills you will have in your company, on the Damocles sword you can put on your business if you put all your patrimonies, your legacy inside a proprietary middleware or a proprietary programmation language also.
Of course, that's right, that you have to be able to do things by yourselves, but it's so huge that this is exactly what we are trying to do with Toussaint and what Orange is presenting on his stand right now. That is that what you have to do is to be aware of the ecosystem and find the right people that have the right mindset. That is that on each usage, you can be an expert. It could happen that you have so great that you don't need an expert. It could happen because you have very good people. And that's exactly what Orange said. That is, for example, on MariaDB, they have expert good enough, but on PostgreSQL, no. So then you have to find the right expert. And when you are looking for open source product too, that if you have to find the product that is open source, okay, but what is the community? Is it bright? Can you easily commit into the community, or is it closed? Because you have to, will it be closed next year or in 2 years or even something else? If Broadcom comes and buys them, you know, with a price they can't refuse, it will happen something, you know. So this is what we have to do. And it's rely on the ecosystem and not only on ourselves. But it needs people to be aware of what is happening in the ecosystem.
Yeah, so what I found that when doing the middle management training is we do mention those roles, and we do mention that there's a lot of those different roles, and we actually did like a badging program for some of that, and so we actually had people basically volunteering to do those things so that they could have that sort of accreditation and be public about it and show off that they were doing it, and that helped with a lot of it, is going through it and doing those different portions.
Yeah, maybe I can just add.
And if I may add,
when it comes to evaluating software and choosing, we also had in place a complete process and a dedicated team that does evaluate and make the right choices.
And I'd like to put in a quick plug for Chaos, CHAOSS, because they're doing a lot on open source community metrics, so that you can go in and look at the different metrics that they're creating and sit there and see how they're ranking different open source projects in regards to their viability.
you can hear me? Yeah. And if I may add, your topic is absolutely true. Open source for IT, if I may say, is still a challenge. But what we want also to tackle this afternoon is OSS for business, which is like even a bigger work to be done.
Okay, so I don't know, is it the right volume for you? Is it the right volume? Louder? Okay. I'm asking, what is the right balance of open source that you have internalized or that you have externalized in your organization? Because I don't know about the private sector, but as Philippe said, in the public sector, we don't have so much resources, such as either money or people. So if you want to have open source everywhere, it takes a lot of resources and efforts. So what is your balance between like internalized or externalized open source?
So at Thales, we started some inner source practices from 2016. So there are a lot of assets. I cannot disclose the numbers, but they are really more huge than the open source one. And we started the open source initiative like 5 years ago, and we have 250 repositories on our organization. And half of them are forks from the people, so Thales people contributing to existing projects. So most of the time it's to fix some bugs. And the other half is our assets that we are sharing with the open source ecosystem. But yeah, so far there are more internally sharing than externally. But I hope to reduce the gap in the coming years.
Yeah, maybe I can add on the right balance between open source and inside or outside is what, you know, obviously what is your differentiator should be kept inside. So this you cannot share. And when it comes to knowledge and how you do your own support for your own solutions, as Simon said, it depends on what you the skills you have inside. So sometimes you don't need support from outside because you can do it on your own, and sometimes you cannot. So you have to ask for support elsewhere, or you need, or you can fork yourself, and you're happy just managing your software because it's very dependent to your infrastructure. And sometimes it really makes sense to work together, like what we do with the Toussaint is those many companies, you know, putting forces together because there's really no reason to do it on your own, or you just cannot do it.
So one funny thing that I did for one client is I did monitoring of their development tools and how many failed interactions there were. And guess who did a lot better? The open source tools versus the internal proprietary tools. Surprise. And it was funny because even the open source tools still did better, where we had a bunch of open source tools where we had developed them and released them to the public. And of course, those tools were still better than the other internally proprietary tools. The proprietary tools were the ones that definitely broke the most often.
And I was actually asking more the question about the people, like either you will recruit them or you will like ask companies to do support for you, or like
outsource developments.
Sorry?
You mean, do you outsource development on open source software?
Yeah.
Well, I guess it's just a few words. I guess again, it depends on the skills you have inside. That's why we do it at Orange. We work with many partners. They provide support, but they also provide professional services. If you want to develop a feature, if you want to fix a bug, it really depends on what you can do on your own. And if you can't, you can just go outside and have it done. And we do a lot of contributions via those partners, and the deal is that they contribute back to the community and they have it, have the codes sent upstream and so on.
For SNCF, it's very clear that having internal people that are contributing, especially on open source software, it happens, but it's really rare. And when it happens, that's something that has to do with the business. And we have two examples. One is Talk, which is a chatbot tool, and it comes from SNCF Connect, and because it was in 2016, and it was because they didn't want to be disintermediate, in the relationship between customer and the platform. If you go to Google or whatever, they know everything the customers are saying, So the input, what decided to make this, it was quite good choice at this time, to have this clairvoyance. I don't know what the vision, yeah. So there was a team inside, but it's not only people from SNCF, but at least the core people that are driving that are people from SNCF. And the other example is more recent. This is in the Open Rail Association, so the foundation we built on rail. We are releasing something which is called Open Source Railway Designer, where there is a lot of people coming from SNCF and with a lot of know-how, And this is the only domain, I think, where there is people really involved in open source, core product. Otherwise, it's more bug fix, and that's something we need to encourage. But some people are doing it, so that's the way of the OSPO and what you want to achieve within OSPO. In doing that as institution, you have the right to do contribution, but more than that, you are encouraged to do that. And then you have to explain how, which account, and so on. Right. But to be clear, nothing apart something that is really has to do with the business.
I think a lot of times that the OSPOs help with that a lot, right? Because the OSPOs can come in, and I think a lot of people first started creating OSPOs because of the legal issues and making sure that whatever they go in and do, they're handling it correctly, legally speaking. But later on, it becomes, as an OSPO evolves, and we talk about that in the book a fair amount, they understand more as how to handle some of these other issues, and community becomes a big part of that engagement aspect. And like we were talking about, that's one of the winning pieces of that. So.
Yeah, I didn't want to open the legal thing, but thinking the contribution is hard to have people contribute. Either they do it in a shadow way, so it's not really official, it's not declared, and that's a problem. Or they want to do it the proper way, and it can be a little bit heavy. There are rules to follow for a good reason, but that's an entirely a complete chapter. Really.
One of the things that we got at PayPal is basically I got them to approve Apache 2. And so anybody could go through and do anything on an Apache 2, but if they wanted to do GPL or any of the others, then they actually had to go through legal. So basically, they effectively only did Apache 2 because it was the one that no one had to worry about.
That's a good way to make it easy. I think Google kind of has the same approach. It's either if it's Apache 2, it's straightforward, the highway. Otherwise, you have to follow that long process. So I think we have time for a last question, if you.
So I think be it a company or Louder?
Yeah, we can't hear you, unfortunately.
Okay, you don't have it. So, be it a company or be it the state, the public administration, we want all the open source software that we use to be sustainable, right? We actually need it to be sustainable. Some of them have business models, and they can we can support them through their business models, but some either have a bad business model or don't have a business model. So how do you see the landscape there for companies or administration to support, fund open source projects to be sustainable? I don't want to say donations because I don't think it's charity, but just to be clear, sometimes it's seen as sponsoring or donations. But how do you see the landscape, the maturity of companies in both accepting this type of funding and providing this type of funding?
I can begin. So I am the president of the TOSIT Association too, which has a stand on D31, and we are a bunch of organizations that are thinking about this problem. We are only end customers, and the question is, how do we do better open source? And this is one of the questions we are asking ourselves. How do we do our part? There is several response. I think one of the response, but it's not a good one, is charity, but it's not the way to do it. You have to promote a sustainable model. And for example, what is doing Orange, and which is an inspiration for me as SNCF, with having in the budget budget maintenance for open source. That's very important, because when you have something with proprietary software, you don't have to think, you have to do it. Okay, it's 20% each year. You use it, you don't use it, it's 20%. So you have to apply the same model. Okay, I use open source software, so I have maintenance budget for maintaining open source software. And this budget of maintenance goes to the company I need for sustaining the bricks, the bricks that are critical or very useful for me. And they have a bunch of companies that are very specialized on one topic, and they give them money at the beginning of the year, and they need them or they don't need them, they pay them. Okay? But it's a very good enabler, because then when you have a problem and you want to evolve, I don't know what, QGIS or PostgreSQL or whatever, it's already paid anyway. So you just have to say, okay, could you do something on this? Okay, it costs 3 days. Okay, so I just have 20 days left or whatever. And if you don't have enough day, then you buy them. But then the company knows that she has this business, and this is really what we want to. For me, I would like to achieve, but I didn't manage to make that understand to my boss. Because you pay for something you probably don't consume. Why should I pay?
Well, one of the things that we did to make it possible is to consider you buy support, you buy maintenance, professional services, just like if you would buy a license, and not as an integration cost. If it's integration, first it's not the same columns, it's not all the same lines, in accountability. So if you save 200,000 euros on licenses, and then you ask for 10Ks for integration, you'll be, I can't give you 10Ks just like this. But yeah, you just save 200Ks there, but it's not the same lines, so it's different. So we just consider now that you buy maintenance or support just as if it was licenses. So like Simon was saying, it's a yearly cost, just like license. And all of a sudden, you save 200, you can get 10 very easily. So that's why it works really well.
Yeah. So one of the things that I see a lot, so corporations definitely need to, and that's why I think the middle management is so important, is to educate them so that they can report correctly, so that you have better metrics, so that you're not having those arguments, right? Oh, we saved 200, but now we need to go spend 10. Why are you preventing this from happening? And that's definitely one of the big roles of an OSPO, is to help mitigate and show that, so that everyone can understand how to do that. I would like to highlight some other models that are coming into play, that are experiments that I don't know where they're going to go yet, but as he knows, this is kind of my gig. So one of the interesting things is, the UN is working on their digital public goods to go with their SDGs, and they're looking at, once different open source software or digital public goods or whatever they data, whatever. Whatever they want to call it, once it fulfills their standards and they get certified, then suddenly funding opens up. And they can get different funding for a bunch of their different models. And so I think that's interesting. You know, it's moving, it's still moving slowly, because, you know, UN. But that's how that goes. But the good thing is then hopefully it will actually be stable. And then the other thing that's actually happening, and of course, once again, I promised you I would be controversial, the crypto world. The crypto world is doing a lot where they get money from doing the transactions, especially the ones that are trying to go for, instead of burning a lot of energy, or doing proof of stake instead of proof of work. And so what happens is they take part of that contribution. Well, they're using that money to make sure that their open source pipeline for their open source cryptography keeps going. And so there's several different projects that are doing that. One that's just actually doing a constitutional convention to create that right now is Cardano, but Filecoin and IPFS has been doing a lot of work in that regard too. So I highly recommend looking at some of those. They're cutting edge, which means that, you know, there's bleeding occurring, but and it can be a bit gross, but at the same time, it's absolutely fascinating what's going on there. And there might be some interesting stuff going on there in regards to, you know, I know the word meritocracy was created as a joke, but there is something that's there where you can actually measure all of the work that's being done and who's doing it, and from there you can create a compensation model.
I think there's something, there's another aspect. Sorry, I'm going to jump in on this one. I have to. I think there's another aspect that people haven't spoken about, and I'm not completely convinced by Nicola's idea of arbitrarily switching costs from one budget line to another, because financial controllers tend not to go along with that, is that you can also support projects not by buying a support service, but also by simply contributing back in to that project. And I think that's something that's overlooked a lot. By contributing back into the project, you create activity around the project, you create learning opportunities for the community, you create marketing and exposure opportunities. And this is, I think, an undervalued aspect of how we can create sustainability within projects. Of course, that doesn't get around, and that's to the side of the whole financing thing. And yes, people still need to earn money, they still have to buy food and all of that. But if we're purely looking at, will a project survive, will it go forward, having active companies come back into the project, I think, is also extremely important. It's not just about having some service company or paying for a professional service. That would be my take.
But it does work.
Of course it works, but you know, it works only when the project is backed by a company. If the project is not backed by a company and you're just paying a professional service provider to help with the project, you know, does that work in the same way? I don't know. But anyway,
To be continued.
And
I guess time's up. Thank you very much.